Anybody used Ember CLI Addon? No? Okay, so good, because then I'm going to give the easy presentation. I'm going to show you all how to create a basic app and then pull in an add-on. It's going to be really simple, but hopefully you'll get something out of it. And then after that, I'll we'll go into a little bit about how to develop an add-on. It might be a little bit too high level, but let's see. This is the Ember CLI website, along with ember.js.com. This is like your go-to website, and they have just updated all these docs for add-ons. Now, a lot of this stuff is for building an add-on. We'll go through first about how to include an add-on, but it's pretty basic. An add-on is an NPM package. Everybody use Node, NPM? Yeah, it's super simple. So we could go over to NPM, and the good thing about an Ember add-on is that in order for it to work, you must have in your NPM package the ember-addon keyword. And that means you can just go in here and search for it, and you can find all the Ember add-ons that are out there. And there are already way over 100. And they just have them for everything. The one I want to look at, there's a really basic one that's been out for a while. Let's see.
While you're looking for that, you don't have to publish them either. You can keep them private on your own private Git repos, and it works the same way. So just in case anybody's curious about that.
So there's one out there, it's a simple date picker, but it's really good, and it touches on a lot of different features. So we have candidates. Alright, so you can see this is just normal NPM package, and I usually recommend going to the GitHub page because I don't know why, but NPM always seems to have like older docs than what people have on their GitHub page. So you can see here, he talks about this is just how you install an add-on. You go into your project directory, you do a normal NPM install, save dev to keep it in there, and then earlier we were talking about using generators to do the setup of the add-on. So that's all you do here. This guy has a blueprint in his add-on, and it's named after the add-on. So you just run it right after that. And, I'll show you how it works. We'll go ahead and create one. Create a new.
This is just like Rails.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a lot of the same people. Alright, and now we go in. Let's just go ahead and start it up just to make sure everything's running right. Alright, so we've got our app running. Now we can just copy and paste these really nice instructions. So if we cut out our package, we should be able to see it in there, right there. So NPM just handles all that for you. And now we're going to run his blueprint.
So are all those other dev dependencies default?
Yes.
Because you just
Ember
created this
CLI
from scratch,
creates,
right?
Ember CLI creates all this file for you. And you can see Ember CLI is a dependency. And this is kind of awesome, but all these things right here, these are all Ember add-ons too. So I was going to show you all some of them too. But so Ember CLI invented the add-on concept, and then it used it for all its tooling, which just makes sense. So if you've, how many people have used Ember CLI so far with the generators? You know, a little bit. So the G just stands for generate, and let me get through this. Get a list of them all. So these are all the different kind of modules that are in Ember Ember app. So you can have a view. So you can do Ember generate view, and you can give it a name. You know, generate your files for you. Real awesome. So the one we just ran, Ember generate. This basically just runs the setup script for this add-on, and I'll show you what it does.
Read a physical plugin.
I swear, every time I try to give a presentation in this room,
Chinese firewall.
no.
Aggressive life.
I can get you a wire
You might have to.
or batteries. I have batteries too.
Well, it was maybe kind like half an hour ago. I gave you some on the presentation.
One key works.
Screw. So obviously, nothing to get too okay, Ember CLI date picker. Here's the blueprint. Here it is. So Ember is really big about hooks. So you notice this thing just exports a normal node module. And after install, it's just a function in there. But it gets called by the by Ember CLI's library. And you can see what happens. It just calls this function add power package. So that adds the pick a day power package and then the power package. That's what that generator does, that command that I just ran. So pretty simple.
So if you knew you were gonna do a project and you knew you wanted more than one of these, do you add them one at a time, or you just, at this stage, add 3 or 4 add-ins and tell you?
Oh yeah, you just npm install them as you want. You can do them all at the same time. It'll work.
You want me to get a wire?
Yeah, but see, who was here the first presentation I gave where everything screwed up? I knew y'all. Yeah. I have the worst
So you're saying that generate command just created this index.js file? Is that what you're saying?
No, okay, so over on the left you can see the Ember CLI date picker.
Yes.
This is in our node modules. And it has a blueprint directory and then the name of the generator. So blueprints are what generators run. So when you call Ember G and then Ember CLI date picker, this index.js is what gets run.
Oh, okay. And that comes when you download the date picker add-on itself.
Yeah, when you do the npm install.
Hello?
So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and show you all how the date picker works. Yeah, we keep it smooth.
The headshot bets and right shot minus 2.
right, so. So all I did here, the date picker app is just a little component, and I just added it here to the application. And here, you can see it actually showed up. It has today's date in it, and this is the component that got imported in. So that's it. I mean, it's just super simple. Like you just run the npm command. If it has a generator, you run the generator, and then you can just use it, whatever it is. In this case, it was just a component. So here's the basic usage, and you can just go to town. We can go over some of the. All right, let me change keyboards.
Okay, if you're PS2 coordinated.
Yeah. There's a Okay, so over on the left, the Ember CLI date picker directory, there's an add-on folder and an app folder. What the difference is, the add-on folder is everything in that is going to be exported under your add-ons namespace. In this case, it's going to be Ember CLI date picker. So we could go over here and go to console. And we can do like, we can look at all of our modules that are loaded. And we should be able to see Ember CLI date picker, and there's the components, there's the actual date picker component that we ran. But on top of that, we have our test app, and you can see it actually got imported into our test app too. And the way that happened is that over here, this app directory, everything that's in the app directory is imported into your apps namespace. In this case, it's this app. I can't see where my cursor is. Yeah, there it is. So the app has the same file, but it's not exactly the same. So this is the add-on portion of it. And then on the this is the app portion, and you see all it does is it imports it and then just exports it right back out. The reason it does that is so that in your consuming application, in test app, if we wanted to overwrite this, we could create our own date-picker.js file under components, and then we could import datepicker there and extend it and do whatever we wanted to it. So, but by default, if we don't do anything, then we just get the default file. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, it's pretty simple. But that's one way that just allows you to extend anything that's in here pretty easily. And it's a pretty good pattern. Like if you wanted to, you could just go ahead and define everything in your app, in your app/component/datepicker. But then it would be a lot harder for people to extend it.
And you could do that, what Matt's describing, in your actual application. You could also make another add-on that pulls this add-on in and then changes things and exports it. So you have multiple add-ons that are different variations of some other add-on that you're basing on. Like, you have complete flexibility.
Let's see, we've got blueprints, generators.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
This file here is components datepicker.js.
Yes. It's this file right here. So it's Ember CLI.
Okay. So app components datepicker.js just imports add-on components.js.
And exports it into the consuming application's namespace. So
Very-
this datepicker.js is this one that's the one we're looking at, right? The other one, the big huge one, is this one up here that's actually in the add-ons namespace.
So where are you referencing this?
This is, what'd you say?
Where are you referencing it? That you have, I thought you showed a code where you are referencing instantiating the data code.
Your index.
Yeah, I actually just put it in the application template. I'm having a hard time seeing the cursor.
Oh, you want your test indexation?
Nice.
Test.
There it is. Sorry. I just cannot see. I don't know. I'm colorblind, so.
Look, what file is this?
Date picker. I'm sorry?
What file is this?
This is application.hbs.
Oh.
I just dropped it in there.
So
'cause
that's
it's
the entry
easy.
point.
Yeah, and it's just a simple component. And you can, as you can see right here, it's just showing up right under the, right under your normal.
Right. No, you also showed another page of source file, right, where it expanded the code. What was that about?
All right,
One of your
do you want to see the actual, the code that it's,
generated out, right?
can you even see the cursor maybe on the left?
Mhm.
No, not really. Do you have the solarized towards the?
I think it's just the, it's just this.
Can you shrink the window and move it over?
Oh, there it is. So this is just a normal, normal Ember component, and it's doing a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, this is a pretty good component, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the add-on stuff per se. But if y'all need some like a refresher components, we can go over it. But it's just pretty much your standard, just extending the text field, adding some J-card and stuff like that. I mean, that's the basics of the add-ons from the consuming point of view. If y'all want to go over like creating them, anything like that. Any questions so far?
What is this code that you're showing us?
This is the actual the code that runs this component.
So it's, okay. So it's the code that's running behind the component.
Yeah.
So basically, like a potential workflow for this would have been, you've written an application, you've needed a date picker, you wrote a component for that date picker. And now you've got 2 more applications that you're building, and you're like, man, I really want that same thing. Instead of copying your component code and putting it here and putting it here, instead you created an Ember CLI add-on that encapsulates that
Understood.
component as an add-on.
Understood.
And now you can just install that add-on into all your applications. Now you have a single source of truth, you can share it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so basically like the three parts of it are the add-on folder where most of your code goes, and then the app folder where you actually export your stuff for the consuming application. And then if you need a generator, you can put it under blueprints. And the last part is this index.js. That is, this is a little bit high level, but when Ember CLI imports your add-on when it's building it, there's a whole bunch of different hooks, and you can see a lot of them right here. They talk about these hooks. Let's see. Here's all the different hooks. So this guy's using the included hook, and that gets run right after Broccoli pulls the files into the build process. After it pulls it in, it says, okay, I want you to also pull in all the Bower files that I need in the CSS file. So this is, if you're interested in building add-ons, this is the kind of stuff you need. If you just want to use them, which is what most of us do day to day, It's just simply the npm install command and then run the generator if it's there, and then you can pull it into your code.
When he was talking about previously, he was talking about grunt. Where does grunt come here? If we're
Grunt is
using
not
it.
used in
Okay.
Ember CLI. Ember CLI uses broccoli. It's not really the same as grunt, but
When do you use this versus?
okay. So over here in this window, I have this is the Ember build server. So Ember is just your command line utility. It gives you all the options. Ember S just has it watch your files and it watches for changes, and it runs a build every time something changes.
So grunt is what's considered a task runner. So you could set up grunt tasks to say, I need to go and check out some code. I now need to fire this other thing that's going to maybe run some code sniffing against it. Then I'm going to run this task that generates documentation. Then I'm going to fire off my build process. Then I'm going to do some other things. So it lets you just sequence a bunch of tasks. And it just kicks off other things. And then like Matt was just showing, Broccoli is actually the build process inside of Ember CLI. So when you build your Ember CLI application, whether it be an actual application or an add-on, it's basically the same difference. Broccoli is what builds, but you don't need grunt at all for that. Grunt truly is just a task runner that it may or may not fit your workflow, depends on what you're trying to do. Within the category of broccoli, you have brunch and broccoli and mimosa, and there's another one I can't think of. They're similar.
Who comes up with these names?
I know. Well, mimosa came after brunch. I have no idea where broccoli came from. Jo Liss is the lady that wrote broccoli. I don't know where she came up with that name.
No, she actually in the ember.js, that podcast they do, Ember Hot Seat. It was like browser. It was a concatenation of like browser build tool or something.
Okay, I can see CLI in there.
Yeah, I think it was like browser
Yeah.
command line.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to listen to more podcasts apparently.
Alright, so originally for this presentation I was going to do something on Dropbox and Ember Data. Problem was that I closed on a house a week ago and I've been trying to move this last week. So I got some stuff going on. Let's see if it'll work. So this is an Ember add-on in progress that I built to access Dropbox. And you can see I've got some real basic rudimentary stuff going on here where you can see just a list of my files that I have in Dropbox. But I was going to show you all real quick the other side of add-ons, which is building add-ons. So right now, this is the actual add-on for Ember Dropbox. But the way it's running is that when you tell Ember that you want to build an add-on, you do it, Ember add-on, the name of the add-on. And here in your test folder, it gives you a dummy application. So this dummy application is what is actually running right here. This is the dummy app. And if we go here and we look at our modules, you can see that everything's dummy. So dummy app is everywhere. And then here's the actual add-on. So Ember CLI is pretty good. When you're building an Ember add-on, it tries to treat it, and when you're running like the Ember server, it'll actually build your add-on like normal and then import it into your dummy app, just like your add-on would get imported into anybody else's app. And so we have the same thing. You can see all the stuff how to build routes and serializers, and they all just get pulled in the same way to the dummy app. Let's see. So. And it's pretty much the same thing. We have the app directory and the add-on directory. And the add-ons, we just import and export it the same way as the data grabs in. And if this was a little bit more fleshed out, maybe in like a month or two, I can show you how it actually all works. right now, it's the same problem we're having in our office. Ember Data does not play well with anybody else's RESTful services. So Dropbox has a RESTful API, and I'll show you some of their code. I mean, it's pretty simple. Let's see.
I'm so happy you said that because I hate Ember Data.
Yeah,
All
no.
the rest of Ember is so nice.
We that's why we replaced it. We just wrote our own. And as I was building this, I was like, well, if I just used my own code I already wrote, this would have been so much simpler.
Is that
We
part
love-
of open? Are you open sourcing?
Yes. We love what it's capable of.
Right.
We love its idea. Like, it's an awesome project. But unless you have absolute perfect control over everything, including the ERD of your actual like concepts of how your data is, you're just asking for trouble, unfortunately.
So is Ember Data like making its own RESTful API calls to synchronize it, and you're having to work with its own convention?
It's a client-side ORM that handles the state of the data. It always stays in sync with the server. So if you make a change in the client app, it automatically talks to the server.
So,
But if you don't have an endpoint, forget the structure of the data. That's a whole nother conversation, like what's going across the wire. But if your data model, just conceptually, if your server endpoints, your API, don't work like that, like if your understanding of REST and how you implemented it, and their understanding of REST and how they think it's working, again, not the code going across the wire, but the concepts. Like it just doesn't, there expects there to be one single source of truth. It's the server at all times. It always wants to be in the mix. If you make a change now, you're in a dirty state. So then you try to copy something, then you get these weird in-flight things. And I mean, we can, separate from this, I don't want to derail Matt's presentation. Like, we talk afterwards, like we spent weeks trying to work around it until we realized we could have written our own by now. And so we did.
Is yours RESTful? Is that
No.
okay?
It's not really RESTful. Well, our actual API is SOAP-based, and then we have a PHP shim.
But we made new endpoints that act RESTful with the correct response code so that we can react to failures correctly. and all that
Yeah,
kind of
so
stuff.
we try to shim it.
But it's RESTful in the structure of the data and less RESTful in the presentation of resources. We still hit RPC endpoints, but we do it in a REST structured way. We always get back a 302, we always get back the correct codes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about that afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. We can pull it up after this. Like, that's the whole point of like the after hours thing.
So if, it's just, I don't know if y'all are really interested in this or not, but basically it's pretty straightforward. The hardest part to implement was the auth, implicit graph flow. I'll use the auth too. But in the dummy app, let's see, the login route, and let's see. Oh yeah, that's right. So basically, right here is where I'm using, I've got some environment variables I set up in our config, because you need a client key to connect to Dropbox. So I set up this client ID and the redirect ID, and on Dropbox side, you go into your API console and you tell it, hey, this is an authorized redirect URI, and it gives you your client ID. So these two are not secret, and that's why you can put them in here, because this stuff you share with the client. There is a secret key if you're going to have a server side up, which you don't want to use. But
See Twitter.
yes. So, in my login route, you can see here, when I click this login button just has an action, and this is the action that gets called. You can see I just open up a new window, pretty simple, and give it a height, the width, and you get the URL, which is the Dropbox auth2 authorization URL, and you just specify your keys. This is all documented in Dropbox's API. And then what you have to do is you get it to redirect your ride. So when the client clicks through and if they authorize success, the way implicit grant flow works is that it will call, it will load a file. And this is the file I created right here. In the, you get a public directory in your Ember CLI apps. And I just created a simple HTML file because you don't really want to do this part through Ember. It's query param. You either have to use query params or you have to parse the hash. So this is all the file does. It just loads up. It looks at the hash because Dropbox will call this file and then it'll put on a hash on the end of the URL with all of the token and everything. So. Just grab the hash, and then I call the window opener, which if you look back here, you can see that I did a little bit of this line right here. I just kind of stuck myself up on the global names, global window, just so I can have access to myself. And then right here, the trigger, I just parse the hash, and then save the token local storage, and then I clean up myself off the window. So that's pretty much the simplest OAuth 2 implicit grant flow that we do. There are a couple of Ember CLI add-ons for grant flow that are out right now, but they're not 100%. I tried using them, and it was a problem that Jeremy was talking about earlier. They're on the one I tried to use is on 0.42 or 0.0.42, and I'm developing on 0.12, and they were not playing well nice together. So I just did this one really quick. Like I said, this is not really part of Ember add-on. This is just a OAuth 2 optimization. But if anybody needs help with that kind of stuff, y'all can hit us up on the Ember Dallas forums.
This hash that you're parsing, that's the hash in the URL that you were showing me earlier that finds the routes, or is that?
No, this is part of OAuth 2 implicit grant flow. When Dropbox, after the user authorizes your app for Dropbox will redirect them back to your site. So that pop-up window gets redirected back to your site, but it also gets a hash put on the end of the URL. That hash is what needs to be parsed because it contains the token that
Like an encryption hash.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I was thinking it had to do with the routing that you were talking about earlier, but yeah. Okay.
no, this is a little bit. This is kind of like outside. This is
Yeah.
something else. But so yeah, it is possible to get Dropbox to work with Ember Data. It's not fun though. I'll show you some of the serializers right here. The metadata is the what they call their entries for each file. I mean, this is what I had to do just to get this, like the stuff to display. So just to get like all of these entries for each file. You can see this is the this is how the files come back from Dropbox. But Ember Data is so picky about the format of once it's data in. One thing you'll notice about all this data, no IDs anywhere. Ember Data requires IDs. So I think I just
Yeah, mine's so.
yeah, I just picked something that seemed pretty unique. They have a revision for each file, so that I just use that for the ID.
Or the number one.
Yeah, it was the order number one product.
That's kind of like why I was like, should I really show this?
You know, it should say math, not random, actually.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Well, oh well. So this is just a normal Rust serializer, and they have a hook just like Ember. It's really fond of their hooks. So I hooked into a normalized payload, which it's called, and it sends you the payload, which is just all that right there. That's all the payload. So I just grab that and I just munge it up until Ember Data will accept it. So now I can go. Let's see if I can get into, I can show you all. Maybe if I do store. This is not something you're supposed to do ever in production, but for debugging, it's okay.
Meaning don't use that literal line in your code.
Yeah.
You can still debug production apps this way.
So you can actually grab your store and then do lookup stuff with it. You see it fires off the request and everything, and then if we go in there, you can see that this is an array. This is an array of all of these files right there. But and you can see there's an ID button. And then there's an ID with that. So, like I said, this is coming along. We're going to release our data layer. And once we do, I might come back and rewrite this using our code, and then it will be so much simpler and so much nicer to look at. But if anybody has any questions about this, OAuth 2, Ember Data, Ember Addons, I know this is all kind of high level or low level, depending on
I thought somewhere I saw SAS. Do you use any SAS here?
I'm not using SAS, but we can talk about SAS if you want. There's some nice Ember CLI Addons for that.
How do you integrate that, right? So is it like regularly doing the regular web development, just download the jQuery.js and plug it in and start writing your CSS? Or
It's,
SAS from that command?
Broccoli. They use Broccoli to build SAS.
Yeah. So you would, let's see what it is. Ember CLI. There is an Ember add-on for it. So if you install this Ember add-on, and then you, in your styles directory, you can see we don't have one here. Maybe we have one here. We have a styles directory, and we have an app, it comes with app.css by default. You can rename that to SAS, and if you install the Ember CLI SAS plugin, it'll just get compiled. It'll get compiled down to a CSS file. That CSS file will get included into your index.html. It'll get linked in, and everything will just work. We use less here.
What's that?
We use less.
Spell it.
LESS.
Okay, no worries.
And it works just fine. I mean,
We actually do 3 levels of importing of our less files, because we have an add-on that's a fork of Twitter Bootstrap, and then we customize that with our own soft layer theme, and then we build it so people can use the actual compiled JS and CSS. We also have the less source. Then we've got the SL components UI widgets add-on that pulls in that source and makes its own modifications. And then the consuming application can put its own less files, override any of those as well. Because this application is going to do a less build, and as long as it has references to those sources along the way, that whole import tree just gets compiled. So at every level, you have the ability to make tweaks to it while still maintaining, that core underlying approach. Which again, we can look at all that stuff. And you can do that with SAS too. It doesn't matter. We just happen to use SAS. But we actually have 3 levels of import, and it all gets compiled, and it works wonderfully.
Does Ember CLI compile it on every request, or only when it starts up?
So every time you run the build, if you're running the server that Matt's running right now,
Right.
then it has a live reload in there that's watching
Okay.
your files.
Okay.
So anytime there's a change, it'll do it.
And it will only rebuild the files that change.
Exactly.
So it's super fast.
So it won't rebuild your less if you didn't change any of your less files.
Right. Okay.
And it does, and they just updated it. It used to take us about 2 seconds for us to do a build. Now it's about half a second.
Awesome.
Because they just changed over everything's synced now. So it's even faster. So, yeah, Ember add-ons, for consuming them, it's super easy. They're just node modules. So you just npm install them. And then if you look at the docs, look at the README, they have a generator, you run it, and then you're off to the races. For building them, it's a little bit more complicated, but I think the main points are you want to keep your code in the add-on directory. but it'll mirror a normal Ember CLI app structure as far as the folders. And then you want to export it in the app directory so that anybody's consuming app can easily extend the files.
And just like with the rest of Ember, there's only one way to do it. So once you've figured out what this pattern is, you're good to go. Like, it doesn't matter if it's simple, it's hard, it's complex, whatever, it's the exact same structure. So there's not, oh, if I got this type of add-on, I need to do it this way. There's none of that. There's one way. That one way changes occasionally because it's still in development, but there's just one way.
So that's pretty much add-ons. I mean, anybody wants, we can talk about this, or we can talk about everything else you want to talk about.
What's the router.js doing there? I thought you only had the date picker in there. So
Oh, I'm sorry, what did you say?
you only had the date picker?
Oh, you want to go back to that app?
No, but I'm asking what's the router.js doing? Your app only had the date picker.
What is what doing?
Which
Router.js.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, so this is in the add-on, and the router's not doing anything. In the test directory in your dummy app, I've got a router here, and you can see I've just got my Dropbox routes just to log in the account. I did write something here for a generator. I don't know if this, how much y'all will understand this, but for my generator for this Ember Dropbox, I wanted to be able to inject this login and logout routes into the consuming application. So I hooked into the after install hook here, and I call this, and basically what it does is it looks in the consuming apps directory and it tries to find your router.js, normally this file right here, and it looks and it just tries to inject itself in there if it can. And I totally just gave this from Ember CLI, this function, because Ember CLI does the same thing when you're, I'll show you. So when you do Ember generate route, it does the same thing where it tries to inject your route into the router.js if it can, which is pretty nice. So you don't have to get your router file. So in case y'all haven't seen it, this is just something that I'm always doing. I'm always looking in my node modules in my Ember CLI directory, and this is the stuff I look at all the time. Lib, broccoli, Ember app. You can figure out how Ember CLI runs almost everything from here. This is where all the magic happens. And then also models add-on is where all the add-on magic happens. And if you can read all this stuff and understand it, you are an Ember god. This stuff is really in-depth.
And those slides that we showed in the news that Robert Jackson had, he talks about the tree fours and the pick files and all those hooks and stuff, and all those 72 slides.
So that is one thing that over here they talk, like they just list all these hooks. They don't actually tell you like how to use them. They're just like, here's all your hooks you can use. Well, so yeah, you have to go here and like actually look at it and see how it actually runs. And it's a really good way to really understand Ember from the ground up.
And that's based on, that's broccoli concepts right there.
Yeah.
Do you have a kitchen sink app where we can go around and play different add-ons or modules? Like what the EXTJS, you have a kitchen sink, you can go play around, right? Have you seen that?
No, I mean, it's so easy to generate a test app. I mean, I just did it earlier. I mean, just run Ember new test app and then just go to town on it. Because there's not like a,
It's not nothing to play around as a client or a suite to play around to say which works or
Ember doesn't really have that. I mean, there are definitely some apps out there that you can download off GitHub. I mean, this is kind of like a cultural difference between the XT,
Right.
which is like corporate, like, here's everything, like,
Right,
whereas
so because
Ember is
they
like,
are corporate, they can do that
Yeah.
better than the others. But that's the whole point, right? I mean, me as a developer when we start over to say, I need to know that's date picker so I can go grab it.
Yeah,
I don't-
as we kind of wind down this part of it, we move into more of just general discussion, hacking kind of things.
Yeah.
We can show you our SL components add-on. We have that built into it.
Okay.
But most add-ons, as Matt was saying, in the community don't really have that, but we built that into our
Yeah.
UI component library.
And the
So we can show you that.
Sure.
yeah, the pattern that people are setting up in the community is that if you want to do a show-off app for your add-on, you build it in the test, the dummy app. That's where you build your, so for my Ember Dropbox app, like this is going to morph into my kitchen sink show-off app as I kind of progress. So right now I've only got like the 2 routes, the count and the files, but as it goes on, we're gonna build it out more and more. And then you can publish your dummy app on a website, and that would be like your demo.
So what we're gonna do, yeah, so adding on to that, so what we're gonna do is take that type of, right there, it's built, right? So there's an index.html, there's a app.js file, and maybe there's a CSS, there's an image, whatever. You take that files that are in that disk folder, you can put those into, let's say you're hosting on GitHub, put those files into a gh-pages branch, and you can serve this static website off of your GitHub pages. So you can have your repo and a website running the sample app. So even though the user could actually go ahead and pull your add-on down and run Ember Serve and then run it in their browser just like Matt is off of localhost or 4200, you could actually just give them the GH pages. So every time you do a release, you just do a build, and then you check that disk folder in your GH pages branch, you check the other code into the master branch, take it as a release, and then you're always in sync. Because again, like Matt's saying, I mean, this is it right here. They're just running off of a local server. You can just as easily put it anywhere, and GitHub gives you a place to put it. Because at the end of the day, like we were talking about, it's a static file and a static application.
But that's not integrated here though, right? It's not in the CLI console here. You need to come out of the operating system to access the GitHub tools.
Yeah, correct. I mean, this right here is running off of the dist folder that's inside of your Ember CLI project structure. When you're running that Ember build, it does all of its build process and puts it in the dist folder. And then this Ember server that Matt's running looks in that dist folder and serves it out as a web application or a web page. So yeah, separate from that, you'd want to take those dist files and you can put them somewhere as your demo.
So, yeah, that's the built website right there. You could just see it's got the index.
And that's actually the dev version of it. If you did a production build, you wouldn't have any of the test stuff.
Yeah.
So it'd be even smaller.
Oh, and immerse your public directory. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, could you go through how you're consuming the Dropbox JSON API and putting it into Ember, the Ember Data store? That's been my biggest, the hardest part of it.
It's not fun.
Yeah, that magical hook that you did, where you could transform it before it went in.
Yeah,
That's the
so-
first time I've seen that.
To be honest, I'm not even sure if I'm doing this right, but it sort of works. So there is a normalized payload hook, and it sends you the payload, which is just the plain old JSON object.
As a JSON object, that's true.
Yeah, so one thing, so Ember Data wants your model name to be key. So my model name is Dropbox. And this is for when you're grabbing like multiple records. So entries is an array, so the key is going to be Dropbox/metadata, and entries is going to be an array. The array doesn't have to be perfect, because if you don't have your key set up in your model, then they'll just get ignored. So let me show you what the model is. The model, all I have is path, register, and size, and then I have recursively Dropbox metadata has many Dropbox metadata.
So you're throwing away some of the attributes.
Yeah, so I'm throwing away most everything because I was just trying to get something working.
Yeah.
And let's see what I did. So I created an array, and the first thing I did was on the parent array, I tried to get an ID for it. And then you can see payload.contents. If we go back over here, let's see. So you can see this is what comes back. You've got like your parent, which in this case is just the root slash, and then it has contents. And each of these is an entry too. So that was my structure, is like one entry, and then contents is a pointer to an array of other entries. And I'm throwing away most of this stuff. It's one thing, it doesn't have an ID, so that was probably the main thing I had to do, which was right here. So for each content, I add an ID, and then okay, one other thing was that when for your relationships, you don't have like a relationship of objects. All you get is an array of IDs. So I think maybe let's try this. See if we can see what it looks like compared to what I actually got. So, if you look here, it's not, it isn't. It looks close. This is pretty close to it, but I don't know why.
There should be IDs.
Yeah, I think that should be IDs. Let me what I should think. I could have swore I was doing it differently. I might be confused on how this actually works.
Relations for me are where Ember Data just crumbles. I can't
Yeah.
get it. Has and belongs to many. I remember I tried to implement that in Ember Data. It was a nightmare. It was so
You know what?
got a bunch of content about ID. Huh.
Yeah, it seems like it should just be an array of IDs, doesn't it?
And it's just a plain JSON object. This is not anything Ember. So it wouldn't have parsed or anything.
Well, it might be doing something on that behind the scenes.
Same magic.
All of these are just plain JSON objects. You know, just plain old JavaScript objects. But it's this one. Now these are already. I don't know. I think that, you know what I think is happening? I think these entries are getting. I think these entries are getting further along the process, like they're getting changed.
Okay.
And then we're still, it doesn't the console, like, you're seeing the final output
Yeah.
here. So like at first they were arrays and.
Yeah, if you go do
all
if
this.
you find the code to
And
a array
models.
point on it, you'll probably see what you're looking
Yeah, I think that's what happened.
for. Yeah, I think that's, unrelated, but since we're in this file, line 18, what's the advantage, or like, why are you deleting that? If it's passed in as an argument.
So if there is if it's like an object or an array, and we pass that through, then it'll throw an error saying like you can't find a model name contents. So you have to delete anything crazy like that. Let's see.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it
It was-
logged it, but it changed it. And then, okay.
Yeah, it was changing it after the fact.
Okay. That
So
makes more
yeah,
sense.
That's, this is probably more, so you can see it still has all this extra stuff in there that eventually gets thrown away because I don't have keys set up on my model. But that's as far as I've gotten with this so far.
Cool.
Yeah, like I said, Ember Data is not, you have to do it. Well, the other thing is too, is that I'm using the RESTful, the REST serializer and the REST adapter. Probably if I just written a straight up adapter and a straight up serializer from scratch, it might have been easier than just using like temporary Ajax calls. It does do a lot of heavy lifting for you as far as like making the calls for you, but then I don't know, there's a lot of trade-offs. Like you have to, I had to override the path 4 times because so this is my base class right here. And you can see I have my host, my headers, where I send the authorization token, and then the namespace. And then on top of that, it wants to tack on the model name, but Dropbox doesn't have like good REST URLs. So for metadata, the model, this is the path. So you just have to override that.
Is it making a new HTTP call for every? Is it hitting Dropbox every time you go back and forth?
Yeah, I think so. It's not caching it. And that's not something I've really looked into yet, because I'm still. So let's switch. Go to account. Yeah, it is.
Okay. Thank you. That was helpful.
So for Ember Data, hypothetically, if you have your API calls formalized to work with Ember Data, what other problems would you run into? Because I mean, I like how that when you call for a person, you can get that simple
Yeah.
model. Like I'm down for that. So what other?
I mean, honestly, if you're in charge of your backend, if
Yeah.
you're running like a Rails app,
Yeah,
active
perfectly right in
model,
Rails.
if you're doing active model serializer, there's probably like Ember Data is probably like the big one too.
Okay.
Like if you've got control of it, but when you're doing stuff like when you're trying to write to somebody else's API, or if you're trying to write to Software's API, man, Ember Data just. But yeah, I mean, I have this another app that I'm writing. I think you probably saw it, the first one,
The music app?
Yeah, the podcasting app. And I use Ember Data for it, but I'm doing everything IndexedDB local storage, and it works fine. It's I mean, a couple of problems with the adapter for local storage, but other than that, Ember Data works good if you have green field. But use cases like this, it's not fun.
Or like we were writing a shopping cart kind of thing, and even if we had API support for it, like when you're adding items to the cart, we're not like going to the API and adding it. We're trying to keep it local. Ember Data is like, it's just not how I work. Like if you add something to me, then I'm going to post it for you. And you're like, no, don't do that. And so then as soon as you try not to do that, then you start getting the weird dirty state because it's like, well, now you can't save me because you've already done something to me. And you're like, you weren't supposed to be in the way. And then like if you stray off that path, it's a sheer cliff on either side of that path.
So if you had like a map or a router for this difference between your server and client, could you then, is there something that you can implement right now where you can kind of formalize a Ember-esque data response from Dropbox?
Well, that's what
Like
that's
you
what
were
the
reading that
adapter and
minute.
the serializers before. Like the adapters tell it how to connect to the server, and then the serializer tells it how to
Set the ID
transform
and
the data.
all those. Okay.
Yeah, and that's where the pain points are.
Okay.
But yeah, it's so like Matt said, here like those IDs, if they don't match up, what do you do? So like take a shopping cart again. So we got past what I just described. And then we ran into, well, let's say I have a cart, and I've got this, cart model, and I've added a product model, added a product model. So I've added 4 things. Now somebody wants to remove one of the models from their cart. Well, it doesn't really remove it, because the only way it really gets removed is if it actually talks to the server and then it can be flagged. It's set as hidden, but it's still there. So now how many items do I have on my cart? Well, I've still got 4 as far as it's concerned. And then when I try to do something, it's like, we can't do anything, there's still data there. You're like, but there's not data. So then you're trying to manage this, like, its internal state of like, okay, what do you think is there versus what do I know is there? And then let me write a layer on top of that, because I don't really have an API that's driving it, because when I go to add a new thing, it's got to have its own unique new ID. And so now I've got to like go through it. But here's how you get an ID when you go through Ember Data. It has to go to the server with a post, no ID, and then it gets it back, and then that's the ID. So now I have to like fake putting an ID in there, but now I'm back into a dirty state. Now I can't do anything else with the record. Like, it's weeks.
Yeah.
We spent weeks and finally said, this is ridiculous. I guarantee you we could have written one better now. Or not necessarily better. We could have written one. Yeah.
Mhm.
So our first, I think we mentioned before, our first attempt at it a year ago, myself and the manager here, we spent a weekend and ripped it all out and rewrote our own from scratch. And it did us just fine for what we needed. Then when we tackled this project, we're like, okay, we need something more robust, et cetera. And Matt took that project on in, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks, I'm not sure, to really make it like every edge case. Look at what Ember Data does. What's their interface to their store? So if we ever wanted to go to Ember Data, we've got the same API calls, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So we didn't code ourselves. It was a little cowboy coding a year ago. This time around, we're like, all right, if we're legitimately going to put this into our platform and it's an Ember Data alternative, we should at least be as consistent as possible with the rest of the community. And so Matt spent some serious time on it at that point. But yeah, we've walked away from Ember Data. We've tried 3 times now to use it. We run into the same problems every time. And again, it's not Ember Data's fault. It's just Ember Data is, if Ember's opinionated,
Yeah. Everything's affected, so.
yeah, I mean, Ember is a walk in the park compared to Ember Data.
Ember Data is the reason why I keep going back to Backbone, just because it would be so nice if
Yeah,
it,
and there's alternatives out there. There's Ember Model, there's EPF.
I've used Ember Model.
There's another one I can't think of. We've written our own, which we're open sourcing. Because the nice thing about ours, besides all that stuff, is you don't have to define your models. You get back your JSON data, and it parses every property recursively. And if it finds a matching model name for the property name, it instantiates that Ember object. Otherwise, it's just a property. And so,
it's like automatic relations.
yeah. You don't have to do any definition. You don't have to worry about, oh, I had a property show up that there wasn't a definition for, and then Ember Data goes, what are you trying to do to me? You don't have to do a serializer and strip off the stuff, so you don't have those problems, like all that kind of stuff. Like, because we're not managing dirty state, we're not managing, you know, all that kind of stuff. We're just like, look, we really just need a data layer. We don't need an ORM.
That's nice. I'm excited when you open source it.
Yeah, I mean, we can, like I said, here, I will take a quick break, but we can show you. I mean,
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
we're a couple of weeks away, so let's just say 2 or 3 to be safe. I mean, Matt's right now writing the rest of the unit tests and the documentation for it.
Excellent.
But it's done. I mean, the code's done. If we're going to release it, we want to make sure it's as robust as possible, so we have as little questions as possible out of the gate.
Yeah, the documentation is essential for
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Then
Yeah.
you can just go, hey, docs.
Yeah, we've got a working demo, unit test, full documentation.